Bonsoir et good evening, everyone. My name is Monia Mazik. And,
Je suis très heureuse d'être parmi vous ce soir.
For this first online hearing, the Commissioner Alex Neve and Debbie as well. I wanted to maybe start with making some brief sort of reminder or remarks about this commission, because what we expect from this commission of stories and what is really what we would like to the impact of this commission. So 2 weeks ago, the Ottawa People's Commission started to hear its first witness in person, and today, as I said, we will be holding our first online hearing. The People's Commission is a key element of the community response to the disruption of last winter, January-February convoy occupation that affected so many local residents and businesses. So our goal is to be here. I know it is online, but we will, like virtual, but we will try to create a venue for healing and for justice, hearing the stories of those who were impacted most and looking at the response of governments and the community with a view
des gouvernements et de la communauté pour faire des recommandations pour éviter ce qui s'est passé, que ça arrive à nouveau. Alors avec ce genre de
of our mission and of our commission, I would leave now the floor to my colleague, Alex Neve.
Merci beaucoup, Monia, et bonsoir tout le monde. I'm Alex Neve, and I'm another of the four commissioners. This evening, we have three of the four commissioners who are present and engaged in the hearing. Today, our colleague Debbie Owusu-Achia is also joining us. You're going to hear a little bit more fully from Debbie at the end in the wrap-up phase. As Monia has noted, it is rather significant this evening because this is the first of what we anticipate to be several online hearings. We're trying a mix of different approaches to, amongst other things, maximize accessibility for people. And so tonight is our first time going online. Tonight, we are going to hear from three local residents who have all indicated that they are supporters of the convoy. They made that indication when they registered to appear before the commission. As Gail has laid out, we're asking each of them to make an opening presentation of around 5 minutes, and that's been the same for all of the sessions. And then we, the three commissioners, will likely have a number of questions in follow-up, and then we will move on to the next presenter before we've heard from all three. With all of the sessions, we think it's very important. We know that these discussions can be emotional. That people hold a variety of views and have had some very personal experiences. And it's really important to underscore that this is a place where we want there to be a respectful exchange. And we therefore, to everyone, presenters and people who are listening in, we will not at all permit language that is offensive, hateful, or violent. We certainly encourage our three presenters to speak clearly and not too fast, because we do have interpretation on offer. Again, another really important part of making sure that we're maximizing accessibility for the commission process. And so speaking clearly and not too fast, of course, makes it much easier for the interpreters to do their job. And then finally, I guess a reminder to the individuals who are making presentations this evening that the focus and mandate of the People's Commission is the community impact of the convoy. And I really want to highlight those two words, community and impact, and urge that you keep that in mind as you're making your presentation. With respect to community, it's really helpful for us to hear in what way are you from the community or reflecting the experience of the community that was affected by the convoy's presence in central Ottawa. And with respect to impact, what we're really listening for and wanting to understand is the ways in which you experienced or witnessed actual impact of the convoy during those several weeks in February, impact on the community during that time. That would be very helpful for us. So, so keeping that in mind as you make your presentation would be tremendous. And I think that's all I have to say in terms of kind of setting the stage, I guess, a bit and setting out a few ground rules. And with that, I would like to welcome our first presenter to take to the floor, or whatever the virtual equivalent of taking to the floor is.
Hi. Thanks so much for having me. I hope that I can meet what your expectations of this talk. My name is Stephanie. I've lived in Ottawa my entire life, and I have lived in Lower Town for the past 10 years, about 1.5 kilometers away from Parliament. I hope to convey 3 different things. 1, I want to tell my story. 2, I hope to open the doors for healing. And 3, I do have a couple of recommendations at the end. So I had the opportunity to attend a previous session where individuals had negative experiences of the convoy. And I was really struck by how similar our stories are. People talked about feeling afraid and feeling trapped and wondering why the heck anybody was letting this happen. And for me, that's exactly how I felt about the vaccine mandates. I felt afraid and trapped and wondering why in the world it got to be as far as it went. I also heard someone talk about his experience with the counter protest, how this was the first time he had ever participated in a blockade. And similar for me, I had never participated. The only other protest I participated in was a climate march back in 2018 or 2019. And he said about the counter protest, and I'm paraphrasing to a degree, that it was heartening and incredibly positive to meet with people who supported him and wanted to push for collective action. He participated because he couldn't just sit by and do nothing for what he saw was one of the greatest injustices that he had ever witnessed firsthand. And this, I mean, I couldn't have said it better. This was why I participated in the convoy. For me, the vaccine mandates, people losing their jobs, being ineligible for employment insurance, and being ostracized from society was one of the greatest injustices that I have ever experienced firsthand. So to back up a little bit, in April of 2021, I declined the COVID vaccine because I didn't want to take it yet. I wanted to wait until more time had passed before I decided what I wanted to do. But before long, it was, out with the carrot and in with the stick. The federal vax mandates led the way for similar mandates across many institutions, and I was barred from accessing Carleton University campus, which was where I was employed. I was barred from accessing all cultural and social events. I was excluded by family. And to be honest, I wasn't sure if a family member got sick, if I would be able to be at their bedside at the hospital. All over media, social media, by politicians, health professionals, and even in personal conversations I was having with people, the unvaccinated were being referred to as careless, selfish, dumb, disease vectors, racists, extremists. I knew that I was none of those things, but it was still incredibly difficult to endure the months of hatred. So to me, the convoy, this extreme act of civil disobedience, was really a manifestation of just how wrong the vaccine mandates are. When I went to Parliament on the day that the truckers arrived, these people, it was loud, and these people, they looked into my eyes and they told me, you have value. You do not deserve to be fired, and you do not deserve to be treated like a pariah. And I will stay here until someone comes and talks to us, because this is such an injustice that I can't just sit by. And I can't express to you how much this meant to me in that moment after months of just feeling beaten down. And please remember that while this is my story, there are millions of Canadians for whom this affected. So to move on to the healing aspect, I think it's important to say I'm sorry. So I'd like to say I'm sorry. I am sorry to everyone who has lost someone over these past 2.5 years, because it has been hard on all of us. I am sorry to everyone who lost their job and were excluded by their family and friends because of the vaccine mandate. I am sorry to everyone who felt coerced into getting the vaccine. And I am also very sorry to the residents of Ottawa who had their lives turned upside down for those 3 weeks of the convoy, who had their homes filled with exhaust and had loud noises enter their homes. I'm very, very sorry for all of it. And now on to the recommendations. I would recommend that we go back to honoring the principle of informed consent and allow people to make private medical decisions free of coercion and fear of reprisal. The vaccine mandate created a situation whereby millions of Canadians were marginalized, ridiculed, shamed, and lost their livelihoods. From my perspective, the convoy is almost a natural response to this kind of reaction. So my recommendation is that we acknowledge the harms and divisive nature of these mandates. And I think by doing so, it will go a very, very long way in ensuring that no one ever does this again. Thank you for your time.
Sorry, it took me a minute to find the unmute button. Thank you very much, Stephanie, and thank you for, you were almost right to 5 minutes, and you obviously, were well prepared and organized and got your points across. I know I have a few questions I'd appreciate asking you in follow-up, and I imagine that Monia and Debbie may as well. We didn't kind of come up with any game plan as to who goes first, but on my Zoom screen, Debbie, you're up in the top corner, so maybe I'll turn to you and see if you had any questions you wanted to ask Stephanie.
Absolutely, Stephanie. I wanted to say thank you for such a succinct presentation today. I took a lot of notes, and based off your notes, I was very curious because you were there in the thick of it, and you mentioned engaging with the others in the protest, including those who were physically in trucks, and you also acknowledged, which I think is worth kind of noting, the collective apology you have, including those who had to deal with the impact of noise and exhaust. And so I'm just curious from your perspective, because we want to know about impact. While you were there, did you notice that other folks were being impacted by noise and exhaust? Did you hear anything from community members directly as you were participating? Did those community members either engage with you personally, or did you hear them engaging with other protesters? I'm just kind of curious to see what you saw in terms of people being impacted by noise and exhaust.
I spoke to other residents of Ottawa, downtown residents who also supported the convoy broadly. So from their perspective, they didn't have any complaints about noise. I didn't really notice that, to be honest. I was quite focused on what I perceived to be as a humongous injustice, and the I suppose relief I felt that I'm now knowing that I wasn't alone. So I very much communicated with the protesters, and I'm not sure that I spoke to many residents of the local area. I did actually go, there was a restaurant that was opened on Kent Street, and they were welcoming all of us in, regardless of vaccine status or anything like that. So I spoke with them and they seemed quite positive, and I think that they appreciated the business.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Monia, did you have anything you wanted to ask?
Yes. I think I heard you. Well, first of all, thank you for your presentation. And I think I heard you say that usually you don't really participate in protest, and then the only maybe time that you remember yourself doing that was by joining a climate march, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember? I mean, you can maybe, if you want, you can decline answering, but was it in Ottawa, that climate march?
Yeah, it was a climate march in Ottawa in the fall of 2018 or 2019.
Great. And do you remember how long that was?
It was just a couple of hours.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Have you seen another sort of protest that was for 22 days or something like that? Have you seen?
I mean, as I mentioned, I am born and raised in Ottawa, and so there have been no other protests. I feel that perhaps no one ever felt as strongly, perhaps, as they did about the injustice of these vaccine mandates, and so perhaps never felt compelled to go and spend 22 days in minus 20-degree weather.
But do you think that like it is something? I understand that the mandate was very hard and very, very hard on everyone. I think all Canadians were affected by that, but also I think 22 days is something that was not experienced before, right?
Yeah, I agree that I think someone should have gone and spoken to them. I personally I wanted my concerns addressed, and these people were willing to stay there and push to have my concerns addressed. I mean, the people were losing their jobs. People were losing remote jobs. I'm not sure how that creates health within a community, but certainly it seemed to be unjust and something that needs to be, spoken about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, maybe I'll jump in with a couple of questions, and I think I want to follow a little bit in the same vein as Debbie's question, because and you noted this yourself, Stephanie, that you were, I guess it was at the first session, and heard some of that evidence, and I'm sure, whether it's through media or social media or otherwise, you've been hearing a lot about the kinds of harmful experiences that people have been sharing. So Debbie was asking you about what your sense was of the impact of the trucks themselves, the noise and the exhaust, etc. Something else that we've heard from a number of witnesses at both of our sessions is experiences people had of being out on the street, maybe even close to where they live, or going to a coffee shop, or whatever they were doing. And and being surrounded or accosted or harassed or threatened by participants in the convoy. And some people talk about this in very fearful ways, that it was very frightful and intimidating for them. Did you? It sounds like you had a number of opportunities to. You didn't live right in the zone, but you were there on a number of occasions. Did you witness any of that? Did you hear about it maybe even at the time? And what's your reaction, even just to hearing about that now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much for that question. To be honest, I did go down multiple times, and I also have I know many people who went down multiple times, and they always had very positive experiences while there. It is very I was very happy to have attended the previous session to hear these stories, because I hadn't heard stories like that. And I agree, those are important stories and they need to be heard and they need to be shared. I think that it's terrible. It's terrible that people would feel fearful in their city, that, you know, I don't want to take the fear and the exclusion that I was experiencing and then just place it onto someone else. So it's very regrettable that those things did happen. But once again, my experience was always very positive. But I mean, I came with the energy of, you know, being to some degree very happy that these people were here, standing up again to what I saw as being a grave injustice.
Something else that we've heard repeatedly from people, and this too had quite a bit of media coverage at the time, was people being very deeply troubled by the presence of a variety of I guess what in general we might describe as racist or hateful flags and banners. You know, some of the ones that have been referenced in particular, the Nazi flag, the Confederate flag, but a number of others as well. And for some people, that's not just a matter of politics. It feels very, very personally upsetting and threatening because of what stands behind those symbols. So again, I'd be curious, having been in and out of the area quite a bit over that time span, did you see any of those symbols or flags? And if so, how did that make you feel?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I am 100% against any of those symbols and those flags. I did not personally witness anything like that when I was at the convoy. I think it's terribly regrettable that somebody would use the convoy in such a way to spread their hate, because for me, this was not about that. This was about remembering that all Canadians have value and no one should be ostracized and marginalized and treated like that. And I also think it is terribly regrettable that I had not heard any of the stories of the residents of Ottawa who didn't have access to paratransport during the convoy. I heard only about the flags, which are, as you said, or as I said, atrocious. But I didn't get to hear anybody else's story on the ground. So once again, I'm very thankful for this commission that you're creating this space to allow all our voices to be heard.
Maybe I'll just ask one last question and then see if Debbie or Monia had anything before we wrap up. And this picks up on your reference to the concern about paratranspo. Again, something we've heard from a number of witnesses, either their own direct personal experience or being aware of it with respect to neighbors or friends, is the ways in which the impact of the occupation was particularly difficult for vulnerable groups. The reference to paratranspo reminds us of the challenges that people with disabilities experienced. We've certainly also heard about concerns with respect to homeless individuals or people living in very precarious housing. And I could go on. There's other vulnerable groups that felt the impact in very direct and personal ways, and it became very problematic for them, even in some instances, it seems, people not being able to leave their homes. Now, it sounds like you're saying that this is the first you had heard any of those accounts, so maybe it's a little unfair to ask you this question, but I'll ask it anyway. Number one, does that trouble you? But number two, do you have any sense as to whether the convoy organizers or leaders were paying enough attention to that side of things, the ways in which their conduct was almost inevitably going to have that kind of impact on vulnerable groups?
I cannot speak to the organizers of the convoy. I do not know much about the organizers of the convoy. I had heard stories of participants of the convoy handing out food. There was massive amounts of donation. Everything was free. You could walk through the streets and anyone could go and get a meal during that time. I heard perhaps people who lived on the streets did go and get meals and things of that nature, but I don't have any direct experience with any of that.
All right, thanks, Stephanie. Debbie or Monia, did you have any last questions before we move on? Monia, I see your hand up.
Yeah. How many times did you go there? Did you join them during those days?
I must have joined maybe a handful of times. Over the 3 weeks, I would go for a few hours at a time.
And what did you do? Like, did you sit there, or did you take a picture, or did you talk to people?
I talked to people. I'm sure I probably took some pictures. I listened to speeches. I danced and I celebrated. I celebrated with my fellow Canadians from all across this country.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Debbie, anything from you before we move on?
No, nothing else from me. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you again so much, Stephanie. We appreciate you joining us, and your input's been very helpful.
Thank you as well for the time.
Okay. With that, we are ready to move on to our second presenter, which will somehow magically happen on my Zoom screen, I guess. There we go. Hello, Zachary.
Hello.
Okay, over to you for your opening presentation.
Okay, first things first, let me say Stephanie did a beautiful job of speaking. I couldn't have asked for somebody to speak, I'm going to say on my behalf, any better than she did as well, but I will try and add a little bit from my own experience. Myself, I'm a small business owner in Ottawa. I'm not central to the city, although I do go downtown often and love all the businesses that I can get down there. I've been a business owner for a little over than 4 years. I was on the Hill for no less than 7 days, and all of which would have been 4 to 5 hours, if not longer. I tried to kind of be downtown as much as I could during the convoy's presence. I also offered up my business to the organizers of the convoy, to anybody who needed showers. I opened up any access that you wanted for that. I made lots of connections. I made lots of new friends. I met lots of friendly people. I can say with utmost confidence that none of my facilities were misused. Nobody trampled on anything, and my business was left in a better position than it was when I offered it up. I've lived in Ottawa my whole life, and I have worked downtown for about a decade of that. I was in the bar industry. I worked lots of Canada Days. I've attended lots of Canada Days. And I think that's the best frame of reference that I have for what happened downtown. And the atmosphere was more positive than any Canada Day that I've been downtown for. The streets were pristine. There was not an ounce of garbage anywhere. There were communal garbages everywhere. Things were picked up very quickly. There were communal shovels. There were people who were just volunteering to keep the sidewalks clean. And quite frankly, they did a better job than the city does most of the time. And I made it a point while I was downtown to stop and talk with as many police officers as I could, because I had worked with them for so long being in the service industry downtown. I worked in bars, I was a bouncer. And I asked them all specifically, very much themselves, the officer in front of me, I said, had you experienced any violence, be it verbal, be it physical, be anything like that, that you felt attacked from any of the protesters downtown? It was a resounding no. I didn't talk to any police officer who gave me any sort of sense that they felt threatened or intimidated or hated by any of the protesters who were downtown. I saw lots of children. I saw kids, I'm going to say being kids, they were playing hockey in the streets. There were smiles, they were happy. I didn't see any kids who were being dragged along, no screaming, no unhappiness. It was very much a family event, for lack of a better word. I did see lots of Canadian flags. I certainly saw a few F. Trudeau flags, those black ones that we all know. I did not see the Nazi flag that you referred to. The one Confederate flag, the gentleman who was carrying it had sunglasses on and a balaclava. I watched him get booed and ushered out of the crowd. He did not have support from anybody around, and he was not violently, but certainly booed and told to leave, and it was in bad taste. Like Stephanie said, there was a, if you have food, leave food. If you need food, take food truck. And it was, like she said, you could get a free meal just about anywhere. I definitely saw some people who were homeless or who had precarious living situations who did get absolutely everything that they could ask for, and probably a little bit more. There was no pushing. As much as I've been downtown for Canada Days before, there was no bumping, there was no shoving, there was no violence, there was nothing like that. My wife was actually about 7 months pregnant at the time, and she came downtown with me. I had maybe a little bit of apprehensiveness the first day. I was like, okay, well, I hope she doesn't get bumped. I hope she's okay. Nothing. Everybody made room for her, even in the most crowded areas. It was surreal. I saw many demographics of people. I saw lots of different provincial flags. I saw people of all races, creeds. There was no underlying tone of any sort that way. The only place I did feel unsafe downtown was during some of the counter protests towards City Hall. And it was kind of weird for me because I saw no Canadian flags there. I saw no children. I saw lots of dark clothing. I saw lots of face coverings that weren't just masks, people trying to protect themselves that way. And that was some of the only place that I saw like truly hateful signs towards other citizens, rather than it be something towards, I'm going to say, the government or some sort of leader. Those who went downtown looking for resistance found a little bit of it. And so the experiences that some people talked about in that first commission meeting that I was there for as well, most of the people that I saw who went out with a mask on, they said, go home, like, you guys are terrorists. If they walked into the group with a negative energy towards the people around them, then they were met with some amount of love, but they were also met with some amount of resistance. And I think anybody who walked into the group, I'm going to say with an open mind and open heart, were met with only kindness. I had more free hugs than I've had in my entire life. And it was good if you went in that way. I think the people who went there looking for unity found it. I think the people who wanted to be there around other Canadians found it. It was very friendly that way. And it's become my qualifying question to anybody that I talked to about the convoy. I asked them, did you actually go downtown with an open heart? And that's become a very qualifying question, as in it's very easy to tell the people who saw most of the convoy through, I'm going to say, the media's eyes, rather than what actually was going on downtown. And so that's become pretty clear to me in terms of my conversations with people. Like Stephanie said as well, the businesses that did stay open, a couple of them that I talked to had record sales. One of them had done 6 months of business in the course of 3 days. It felt really strange to see people divided, and it was the people who were there for the convoy seemed against the mandates against the rules that were put for everybody by our government, whereas the people who were, I'm going to say, counter protesters seemed far more angry at other citizens. And I think, I don't know, it almost felt like a Stockholm syndrome of some sort, and that citizens were against citizens when it came to the counter protesters, whereas the convoy people were against the mandates and this government stuff. But you had asked about community and impact. I wrote them down in two big words on my paper here. I think community, there was a great sense of community. Being downtown, I covered many blocks. If I wasn't stationary, I was walking 10 blocks in all directions, and everybody was friendly. It was a community I had not experienced downtown in Ottawa through any of the Canada Days or any of my time living in the city. In terms of the impact, yes, there was lots of noise. Yes, there were lots of trucks. There was some amount of organized chaos. If you were trying to drive into the core, it was quite difficult. If you were trying to leave the core, it was extremely easy. I took my car downtown for at least 3 of the 7 days that I went down. And like, once you found parking, you could walk, no problem. And as soon as I decided to go home, it was very easy for me to go home. I'm sure it was
loud. Could wrap up in 1 minute.
Yeah, no problem. I'm sure it was loud. I'm sure that it was, for some people, very traumatizing. But it was a weird one because I saw some people who wanted to be closer to the core, and I saw some people who wanted to be away. And I think it all boiled down to what the view of what was going on downtown. And I think moving forward, had anybody come to the table from the government to discuss these mandates, I think that this would not have lasted 22 days. And I don't think that people would have stayed as long had there been an open, honest discussion about what was going on in Canada. So I appreciate you taking the time to listen to me. Thank you.
Very much, Zachary. Maybe this time I'll turn to you for the first question, Monia.
Yes, thank you for your testimony. Have you participated in, you said that you were in Canada Day, that was the closest thing that was similar to those protests. Have you joined any protests before?
Certainly not to that sort of degree. No, nothing I would call, nothing that would compare to that being a protest, no.
And have you heard of any protests that last 22 days in the past?
No, but I've also never heard of a government that was trying to coerce its citizens into making a medical decision rather than keep their jobs.
But that was also happening in all over the world. That was not particular to Canada. All over the world, those mandates happened. So, and it affected.
Yeah, and there were protests. There were protests all over the world for the similar situation. Yeah, so I think that there have been global protests for this.
Yeah,
yes,
but
absolutely.
Not 22 days, right?
I mean, it has. Yes, I agree. Not for 22 days, but I also agree that there hasn't been anything like this to happen to Canadians either. So I think there is precedent in both sides of this, if you will.
Another question here. Did you talk to your politician? Did you ask them? Yeah.
Absolutely. I contacted my MP, my MPP. I tried to contact the mayor. I tried to contact absolutely everybody that I could get my hands on. And it was absolutely demoralizing, the amount of unanswered emails that I got on all levels of government that I contacted. It was extremely disappointing.
So what did you, like, if I may ask, what did you tell them? What did you ask from them, like to stop the vaccine mandate, or to stop the or to let the convoy go back home, or what did you ask them specifically?
Unfortunately, I didn't even get that far to ask any of those questions. I initially asked for just a 5-minute phone call or an open discussion with any of them. I discussed that I was a business owner. I was feeling the squeeze. I own a gym in Ottawa, and so we were quite hit when it came to COVID policy. And so I had started trying to discuss anything with any politician long before the convoy came about. And so I never even got so far as to ask anything specific like that.
Okay, just maybe one clarification. Is your gym in downtown, or is it?
No, my gym is not downtown. I'm about 15 minutes east of downtown.
Okay, okay, thank you very much.
Of course.
Debbie, over to you.
So thank you so much, Zachary, for your presentation. I had a few questions around your engagement with those that you felt were counter-protesting or may have come, because you used the word, folks who came with an open heart were well received by those who were at the convoy, and those who maybe weren't may have felt some resistance. And so I'm curious from your perspective, because you mentioned, the possibility of people who may have been impacted by the views shared by the media. For those who live downtown, did you hear any of those counter-protesters mention that they live in the heart of downtown and are definitely feeling the direct impacts of the noise, et cetera? I was just curious if that was stuff that you heard from these folks or if you got a sense of that.
Oh, absolutely. Those who, I'm going to say, were not for the protests downtown, yes, they absolutely express it, like the trucks were loud and it was very hard to sleep. I will admit that talking to the police officers, the ones that gave up the information said that the honking would usually stop at about 11 p.m. and would start at about 6:30 a.m. I know that wasn't mentioned in the media by any means. I don't know how true that was, simply because I wasn't downtown, but that's what I heard from the police who spent overnights there. So yes, I'm sure that having trucks parked outside of your building honking, even through the day, even if it's not while you're sleeping, but the other 18 hours of the day, I'm sure that is jarring to your sense of life while you sit at home. And yes, I'm sorry that all those people in the downtown core got, I'm going to say, caught in the crossfire between government and people not being able to discuss this.
Absolutely. And I was going to say, you also mentioned being able to use your facilities to give people access to showers. Yep. I was wondering if you participated in any other way. Did you participate in any of the speeches? Were you someone who volunteered at all, or were you simply just an attendee and then also someone who shared resources?
I got invited to speak. I didn't end up making it up on stage, and didn't end up talking or anything like that. And then outside of what I volunteered, no, I volunteered the showers at my gym, and that was the extent of it.
Great. Thank you, Zachary.
Of course, thank you.
So over to me, I have a couple of questions I'd love to ask you as well. I want to pick up on your reference to showing up with an open heart, which, of course, who could disagree with that? I want to push you a little bit, though, when you think about that in connection with, I think you were kind of mainly referencing that in terms of people who were coming from outside the core and were showing up, and, did they come with an open heart? But let's think for a moment. And I have in my own mind what we've heard from quite a few witnesses now, the people who were living at Kent and Laurier and were right in the thick of it. And, whether or not trucks were stopping at 11 p.m. and not starting until 6 a.m., that's still an unbelievable amount of piercing, pounding noise. We've heard from many residents who talk to us about feeling harassed, intimidated, and threatened when they were walking in the area just outside where they lived. We've heard from residents who talked about their yards or adjoining lots regularly being used by protesters who urinated and defecated in that area. We've certainly heard from many people. I understand that you didn't see many of the flags. You did reference one, but there were many people who saw them almost all the time, or saw them quite frequently, and were deeply upset by that. Anyway, so I think you know where I'm going. I'm wanting us to really sort of take account of this. This wide-ranging and for many people deeply harmful and traumatizing experience they were having day in, day out, 24 hours. It's kind of hard to maybe bring an open heart into how you're feeling about all of that. What's your reaction to knowing what it must have been like for people to endure that kind of experience, who weren't who weren't reveling in the unity and love that you may have been experiencing, but as people who resided in this central area were going through that all the time?
My response is, if that felt bad, you should try owning a gym through COVID. And I understand that that might have been 22 days of piercing truck noise, but I've gone through 2.5 years of trying to own my own business and being told that I was unessential. And so I understand that it must have been extremely jarring for some people. And there were some of my friends who wanted to rent hotels or trade rooms with somebody downtown and say, well, I'll look after your apartment and you can live outside of the city and let's swap houses while the protests go on. And so, yes, I'm sure that it was extremely piercing. It was extremely loud. Yes, there were lots of trucks that were making lots of noise for as many hours in the day. It doesn't really matter. And I can understand that if you were already quite angry about what was going on, that if it became very easy to direct your anger at the trucks outside of your house rather than the government that was imposing mandates on everybody in Canada, that it could be very easy to turn your hate onto fellow citizens rather than turn your hate onto those who were ultimately locking people down and keeping people stuffed inside of their houses. And so, yes, I'm sure that if you were not of an open heart or you were fed up with the way that things were going and didn't want the trucks to be downtown, that would have felt very tough, absolutely very tough. And so, not to sound insensitive in any means, but as a gym owner through COVID, I've had a very tough situation as well. And so, yes, we've all been through some tough situations over the last 2.5 years. I'm sorry that people had to go through that, but it's been a little tough because I didn't have very many people sorry about my gym being closed. And I get that this is outside of the convoy, but I had multiple people who left 1-star reviews on my gym. And so, yes, this has been tough on everybody. I feel sympathetic for those people it's been tough on, but I feel the squeeze as well.
Do you see that there's any limit as to what a community should be expected to endure, both in terms of the nature of the harms and impacts that they were experiencing and how long it goes on?
I don't think that there should be an extreme limit on any sort of torture or malicious imposing onto any citizen, be it from trucks downtown or the government trying to coerce you into putting something into your arm that you're not sure of. And so I think that there should be limitations on all of that stuff. So yes, I think that the trucks being downtown were probably there much longer than anybody would have liked them. Even the people who were part of the protesters, we were all waiting for anybody from cabinet to come and have any sort of open conversation about these mandates. And I don't think that this would have lasted 22 days had anybody come and had some sort of discussion. And so it went on as long as it went on, and it was a stalemate on both sides. The truckers wanted to have a conversation. Trudeau took a vacation. And I think that pushed things along. So yes, I think there should be a limitation on any stuff that we have to endure. And I think that limit was both broken for the 22 days the trucks were downtown, as well as some of the mandates that were put on people.
All right, thank you, Zachary. I see Debbie has her hand up.
Just a follow-up question, because I know you mentioned, I guess, and I'm curious if this came from conversations you had with some of the other organizers or who took a lead of who exactly they wanted to speak to. I was curious because, you know, there were reports and also some other members of parliament who attended the convoy. I was curious if you engaged with any of those members of parliament, if that was seen as an opportunity to hear your voice heard, or were there particular folks within the federal government or any level of government that maybe you personally wanted to see some engagement with? Just curious if either you saw any politicians that you engaged with, or if the goal was to hear from particular levels of government or particular politicians.
Well, so it was my understanding that the goal was to hear from any politician who could have any sort of weight into discussing these vaccine mandates. And yes, there was a few politicians who made it downtown. I did not bump into any of them while they were downtown, but there were some politicians who supported the idea that Canadians should be allowed to decide what they want to do with their body and not have their job threatened over it. But I believe that the convoy organizers or anybody involved wanted to talk with somebody who could have a direct impact on actually changing some of that.
Any last question from you, Monia?
What was your message? Was it more, like your message, was it more personal? You wanted your gym to be open, or were you sorry about, like, I don't know, other Canadian? What was really like your message if you wanted to, if let's say a politician, high level, I don't know, like prime minister or vice prime minister or someone, what was your message, or what is your recommendation?
So my message has started kind of from the beginning of COVID and far more than just this protest. And my message is that if we're going to take into consideration the health of our citizens, that needs to be a far more fulsome approach than you need to wear a mask and put this needle in your arm. And my message has been far more that if we're going to try and start looking after the people's health and citizens' health, and if this is about people's health, then where has the messaging been on exercise or eating properly or vitamin D or any sort of supplementation that might help and now is proven by science to diminish some of the side effects of this terrible virus? And so my message has been health since day one. And so be that, let's have some politicians who want to come and discuss what health might look like, then we should have some sort of talk that way. So both on a macro and micro scale in terms of, yes, myself, I own a gym, I live for fitness. I was a out of shape, unhealthy, fat kid through high school. And so I've been preaching health far longer than this virus has been around. But also now that we're going to have some discussions over mandates and what people should and shouldn't do for their health, why aren't we discussing some far more easy and far less invasive things to take care of the population?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us this evening, Zachary, and sharing your views and your experience.
I appreciate having me. Thank you.
Okay. And we will now move on to our final presenter for the evening. She comes. Hello there. Good evening, and thanks for joining us, Madeleine. Over to you for your opening presentation.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to testify at the Ottawa People's Commission. The Ottawa People's Commission's website says that the OPC was created as a community-driven, non-partisan response to the convoy occupation. I looked throughout the website, but found nothing to indicate that the Commission wanted to hear from people like me, people who had positive experiences with the convoy. Its name, Freedom Convoy 2022, is not once mentioned. The list of options of items to test about contains only negatives. I wondered if a commission that so clearly wanted to hear, seemed to me, only one side of the story would call itself nonpartisan. So I'm happy that I'm able to testify, and I hope that many other people were not discouraged from applying. Why did I go to see the Freedom Convoy? The convoy's main objective was to end mandatory vaccinations for cross-border truckers. But in broader terms, it was a challenge to government overreach of imposing restrictions and making demands of its citizens that violated their charter rights. Long before the Freedom Convoy was even a twinkle in anyone's eye, the Prime Minister berated people who refused a COVID vaccine. Perhaps his most egregious outburst was on a French language television program in September 2021. As Trudeau was speaking about people opposed to vaccination, the program hostess said, "They're extremists who don't believe in science," Trudeau continued, who are often misogynists, often racists as well. He went on to ask, do we tolerate these people? To which American comedian Bill Maher commented, now you do sound like Hitler. Trudeau's words bordered on incitement and promoted division and mistrust among Canadians. I chose not to take the COVID vaccine. I am not an anti-vaxxer. I had all the childhood vaccines and many vaccines as an adult, but I did not want to have 40 trillion pieces of an experimental, inadequately tested mRNA engineered to resist breakdown injected into my body. This mRNA would make my cells create a toxin, the coronavirus spike protein, that my immune system would attack. What could possibly go wrong? We are now hearing more and more about the adverse effects that the vaccines have had. Emerging data show COVID vaccination associated with myocarditis, pericarditis, blood clots, menstrual problems, reactivation of cancers in remission, and even a rise in all-cause mortality. Denmark is no longer offering the vaccine to people under 50. Sweden recently announced its intention to stop recommending vaccines for children. I do not regret my decision. But before the Freedom Convoy came to town, the unvaccinated were much like second-class citizens. We were not allowed into restaurants, bars, gyms, art galleries, or theaters, or on planes, trains, or commercial watercraft. People also lost their job for refusing it. Not many weeks after the convoy's arrival, we were allowed back into those venues, and sometime later, the unvaccinated could return to work. Did the medical science change? Or did it just take a convoy of trucks to give us back our rights? Sweden never shut down and fared better than most countries in terms of COVID cases. The government shut the country down for the better part of 2 years, causing enormous economic and social harm, business failures, increased social isolation, drug abuse, suicide, and mental health problems. But it now blames the Freedom Convoy for a 3-week shutdown in Ottawa's downtown core, a shutdown it itself imposed to inconvenience the protesters, creating a lost opportunity for local businesses. Trudeau dismissed the truckers and their supporters as a fringe minority with unacceptable views, but the tens or even hundreds of thousands of Canadians who cheered the convoy on from roadsides and overpasses across the country, participated in the protests on Parliament Hill, and donated tens of millions of dollars to support them, prove that, minority or not, this was no fringe. Yet no federal or city representative met with the truckers or convoy organizers. The government and the media tried desperately to portray the Freedom Convoy as dangerous and violent. Yet despite the throngs of protesters on Parliament Hill, there were no injuries, broken windows, vandalism, damaged statues, or assaults on police. Despite the absence of weapons and the fact that many truckers brought their families and deployed only bouncy castles and hot tubs, some still think the convoy was an attempt to overthrow the government. Much was made of one, maybe two, swastika flags seen at the protest. I actually saw one of them. It was carried by a man who had a flagpole with 2 flags. The top flag was an F Trudeau flag. Below it was a swastika flag. My interpretation of that message was that Trudeau was a Nazi. I attended the Freedom Convoy for at least one day of each of 3 weekends and on several weekday evenings. My experience on those occasions was that there was a sense of festivity, exuberance, even euphoria, especially on the first day, January 29th. I saw people of diverse ethnic backgrounds and spoke to people from BC to Nova Scotia. To me, it felt like a city being liberated. Yes, it was very noisy, although noise levels decreased significantly, I noticed, after the judge's injunction to limit honking. There was dancing on Parliament Hill, and there seemed to be a permanent party at Rideau and Sussex. I personally did not see any violence. The only thing that I can describe as violent that I saw was at a counter protest I went to on the Sunday of the third weekend, February 13th, at the intersection of Bank and Riverside Drive. Counter-protesters shouted insults at the occupants of cars with flags and other signs of convoy support, and in some cases even swarmed the cars. To sum up, the Freedom Convoy to me represented a challenge to government overreach, a stand for our rights and freedoms that are guaranteed under our beleaguered charter. Unfortunately, the relentless propaganda against the convoy frightened many people and stopped them from participating in a historic event. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing that, Madeleine. Before I turn to Debbie and Monia for their questions, I just wanted to ask one clarifying question, which is, I think I have a sense from your testimony, you don't live or work in the red zone, as it's often called, isn't?
No, I live in the eastern reaches of Ottawa, of official Ottawa, and I'm retired. So no, I went to see what was happening, and I have a friend who lives much closer to the downtown, not in the downtown, but close enough to hear the honking and stuff like that from where he lives. And so I went on, like I said, on fairly numerous occasions, both days of the first two weekends, the Saturday of the third weekend, and then on the Sunday, we went to see the counter protest. And then I went on several weekday evenings, probably 4 or 5, during the, also during the Freedom Convoy protest. And then I went after it was shut down by the Emergency Act.
All right, thanks for clarifying that. Maybe I'll turn to you, Debbie, for any questions you may have.
Yeah, just give me a moment. I was taking notes and then also trying to come up with a question. Madeleine, I do want to say thank you so much for your lovely presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah. I guess my question for you, since you said you had gone a couple of times, and very similar to what questions we've been asking, more on the impact. I'm kind of curious, while you were there, did you ever engage with folks who lived in the downtown area who may have shared their thoughts with those who were gathering about how it was impacting them at all? I was just curious if you engaged with any of the local residents.
The only way I would be able to do that, I think, would be to knock on their doors, because when I went downtown, it was, just the throngs of people. And, so I interacted with some of them, we chatted with a number of them. And, like I said, we encountered people from BC, we encountered not just truckers, but, people who had come to attend. Lots of people from Alberta, the other prairie provinces, and Quebec, lots of people from Quebec and the Atlantic provinces. So it seems to have struck a chord across the country, and everybody's seen those videos of the convoys, amassing from British Columbia and people cheering them on. So I don't know how I would have, like I said, unless I knocked on people's door, how I would talk to local residents. On 2 occasions, I was in hotel rooms. We were talking to people there, and I noted that in the hotel rooms, one was on Slater Street and one was on Albert Street. So it was in the downtown core, 3 and 4 blocks away, I guess, from Wellington Street. You could certainly hear the honking, but it was definitely more muted than when you're right next to the trucks. It was louder on Wellington Street. So I don't know how, I can't remember exactly when that injunction was, but I did notice that the amount of honking, it wasn't as loud as that first day. It was still noisy.
Yes. Okay, cool. And thank you. I guess to kind of follow up on that might provide some clarification. You mentioned having gone to the counter protest that was on Riverside and Billings Bridge, or Riverside and Bank Street?
It was near Billings Bridge. It was
yes.
Bank, Riverside, and I guess it was the eastbound, southbound, whatever, one of the lanes of Riverside was blocked, or more or less blocked, or whatever. There was a police thing there, and there were a bunch of counter protesters there. and the police were diverting cars, and some of the cars had flags on them and stuff. So
yeah, I was curious, while you were in attendance, kind of witnessing that counter protest, did you get any sense of the messaging that people were sharing? Any sense of why they were counter protesting at all, and what your interpretation of it may have been?
Well, I did notice a sign there that's on one car, a bumper sticker said, "The only war is class war." So I'm guessing some of them were Marxist or whatever. I did see a PSAC sign there, I believe. So, and when I went to the counter protest, we didn't give any indication that we were on the other side, so to speak. We just sort of went and milled around and stood around and stuff. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't nearly as, there weren't nearly as many people as at the main protest, but we went to check it out.
And so while you were there, you didn't hear what folks may have been saying to the cars or the trucks that they were blocking at all?
No, we just saw them approach, and if I heard, well, I mean, maybe a few expletives or something like that. In fact, well, my friend and I one time, we went down Bank Street to get some photography stuff. And as we were walking down there, and I had an anti-enforced vaccine sign, we were yelled at too by a few people, told what we could do reproductively with ourselves and this sort of thing. So, I'm sure there were rude people on both sides, but I really didn't see any at the protest downtown, rude interactions of people. I would guess most people who didn't like the truckers didn't go there. I heard on the CBC one time to, if you don't have to go downtown, keep away. And that probably, might even discourage people from going and checking things out.
Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie. Monia, over to you.
I'm curious, let's say if there was some sort of a counter, like a protest happening in Vancouver, would you consider going there?
It very much depends on how important the protest was. I would consider it. It would depend on whether I was able to get there.
Yeah, it's a matter of money and.
Well, it's a matter of money. It's also a matter of what is it about? How important is it? How important is it to the country? How important is it to me?
But if it was, let's say, the protest happening instead of Ottawa happening in, I don't know, in Vancouver or in Calgary, would you consider going there?
I think I would have considered going. Yeah, for this thing, I believe I would have considered going for sure.
Yeah. Do you have an idea how many people were in downtown protesting?
I really don't know how to estimate that large a number of people. I know that Wellington Street was packed, and then you go down like Metcalfe, O'Connor, Bank, and Kent, and it would thin out a little bit like on those cross streets, but it was really all those streets, lots of people on Spark Street too, parallel to Wellington. So I'd have to say at least tens of thousands of people, but I don't know. And it was more packed on weekends. That first weekend, it was really, really a lot of people.
Yeah.
And other weekends too. Like I said, weekends were. So I would say at least tens of thousands of people. And then there's, a lot of people who couldn't go, who were, on overpasses and stuff in other provinces. And then there are people who didn't protest, but probably, quietly supported the whole thing, just as anything. Not everybody.
How did you hear about the convoy?
Well, I saw it on the news. I mean, I sort of watch a lot of different news sources from various angles, from various political points of views. And it started, I believe it was the CBC was trying to depict a convoy in BC as objecting to road conditions. And I thought, that's totally weird. And it turns out that was bunk. It was actually a part of a convoy. They were coming to Ottawa. So I think people were trying to, or, the powers that be were trying to discourage the convoy from happening. Understandable.
But you really welcomed the convoy, right? You wanted them to.
I did. I know friends who lost their jobs because of vaccine mandates. I know one woman who was pregnant and really didn't want to get the vaccine and had to, and was crying and, you know, upset about it. I was just so happy that
how did it impact you? Did it impact you anyhow?
Well, like I said, I'm retired, so
yeah.
It didn't impact me. If I had still been working, I probably would have lost my job because I was a civil servant.
But you were already retired, right?
I was already retired.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
I guess that's over to me for a couple of questions. I want to pick up on something you referred to, Madeleine, when Debbie was asking you about your interactions with residents of the neighborhood, and you described that, you know, that would involve having to knock on people's doors. And that brought to mind for me the fact that we've heard from quite a number of witnesses, and I think this was already out there in the media, etc., that there were a lot of people who were simply terrified or unable to leave their homes. So yes, you absolutely would have had to knock on their doors because, you know, as a lot of people have described to us, they felt like they were prisoners in their own home, that they were trapped in their own home. And I'd just be curious as to what your reaction is to that. You know, obviously we understand that you welcomed the convoy. You certainly wanted to see an end to the mandates. But does it trouble you to know that people were having that kind of experience during those weeks?
Oh yeah, I feel sorry for the people who were, you know, either felt trapped or were afraid of what the convoy represented. I do believe, however, that some of the fear was because there was a certain amount of fear mongering going on. For example, there was a fire that was set in the lobby of an apartment building. I think it was on Metcalfe Street. And I remember I was driving at the time and listening to the CBC, and the reporter said, and the arsonist said he was associated with the truckers. Now, I never heard a retraction of that. I know it was reported on other media. Well, it turns out that arsonist had nothing to do with the truckers. But if a person believed that this arsonist had to do with the truckers, you know, such a person might be afraid and think these people were violent. And I remember police chief at the time slowly referring to something like an increasing volatile and dangerous crowd. And I had been among that crowd and I didn't see it as volatile and dangerous at all. But again, if you were a listener and you hadn't actually gone, you might feel intimidated. So yeah, I certainly do sympathize with the inconvenience of having all those trucks at your front door. And you know, normally I wouldn't be in favor or crazy about diesel fumes and loud honking, but it seemed, you know, walking down Wellington Street and with everybody so cheerful and euphoric and just sort of generally happy, it didn't bother me. Now, if I'd been a person living there who, you know, actually thought the truckers were violent, it would be terrifying, I would think.
I guess I would want to share with you, I mean, we're hearing from people who weren't basing that sense of fear and worry on what they were hearing on the news. We're hearing people share with us direct encounters of harassment and being accosted and feeling very, you know, physically threatened. So just so you're aware of that.
Well, you have some of the first day's events on your website, and there was a video that one man showed who was a counter protester, and I didn't see actually anything frightening in that video. Like, I didn't see anybody shouting at him or trying to take a sign away or attacking him. I mean, yeah, if you go, you know, I'm sure if I'd had a whatever sign at the counter protest, somebody might have said something. And actually those people that Zach mentioned near City Hall who were calling people names, we went past those too, and they were calling people names and stuff, these counter protesters. So yeah, so sorry, you heard from people. Yeah, so I can just say
to clarify for you that that when we're hearing that from people are actually describing to us real incidents that happened to them. They're not just picking it up from the news. But I wanted to move on to another point, and that was to follow up on the swastika and your interpretation of it. And obviously that was your interpretation. I just want to ask, can you understand that for other people, and let's in particular think, with respect to the swastika, someone who is Jewish, with respect to the Confederate flag, someone who is Black, people for whom those images have a very particular message of hate and racism, that it wouldn't be necessarily so easy to have the interpretation that you gave it. And does that trouble you to think that people had to live through those kinds of experiences?
Well, I think the swastika is disturbing. You don't have to be Jewish to be disturbed by it. And when I saw that flag on the flagpole, the interpretation was he's saying Trudeau's a Nazi, but I also thought, what a stupid thing to do. Using a swastika is just stupid because, well, for one thing, and we saw this happen, it will be used against you. The interpretation that fellow made, and I saw 2 videos where people are saying this guy was an Eastern European and he was saying that Trudeau was a Nazi, which was my same interpretation. So I think that interpretation is correct. But if you ask me, was that a smart way to make that statement? No, it was an extraordinarily stupid way to make that statement. So I think it was stupid to have that Nazi flag. But my concern is that this one flag that I saw, and I believe there was another one, because a friend of mine said she saw one and it was a Nazi flag and it said, "Is this what you want?" And a Nazi flag saying, "Is this what you want?" implies that, no, you really don't want this. So again, I think it was stupid to have that Nazi flag, which I didn't see. But it seemed to me like I didn't see a Confederate flag. I saw a video of one, and exactly as Zach described, people were shouting at the guy. He had a balaclava on and people were booing at him and stuff like that. So I frankly think that Confederate flag was a plant, just based on, why is his face covered? Why is he doing that? And the CBC news report I heard in the World at 6 said something rather festooned with fascist symbols. I'm thinking, what? Festooned with fascist symbols? I saw one Nazi flag. Apparently there was another, and there was a Confederate flag. Okay, that's 3 flags out of how many tens of thousands of flags? Plus, I also saw a couple of rainbow flags there, and nobody was harassing the rainbow flag people. So, there's some people who might have gone there with their own issues, but I think those fascist flags, I think they were they were making a statement against Nazism, and I think the Confederate one was a plant. And those are the only 3 that I know about. I saw a whole bunch of different flags, lots of provincial flags. I saw the original, I learned it was the original Quebec flag, a tricolored flag with a guy with a gun. I think it was green, white, and red. And then there's a guy like a hunter or something holding a gun. And that was the very first flag of the habitants of Quebec. I saw a Hungarian independence flag. So there were a bunch of flags, but I don't think most of them were hateful at all. I didn't know what all of them meant, but
yeah. I guess I'll wrap this up, but I would just kind of give you kind of 2 things to think about. I think it's far worse than stupid to show up with those flags in any public setting. I think we really have to recognize that those are so vile and racist by their very nature that it far transcends stupidity. And I think that's what we've been hearing from people. And I think some of the flags that you're referencing, you may not be aware of this, and even I wasn't necessarily aware of it, but people who are in the know will actually tell you that a lot of those flags have very particular meanings associated with right-wing groups, etc. They were not just sentimental flags from an earlier era. So anyway, I don't want us to get too preoccupied with flags. I was just curious as to your reaction, because we know it was very deeply upsetting for people. The last thing I wanted to ask you is about the police. Again, we've heard from quite a few people who describe an absolute inability to get any response from police or other officials, whether it was trying to report bylaw offenses or even have police intervene when there was a tense and potentially even violent encounter happening to them or something they were watching. And people described to us simply not getting any response, for instance, when reporting bylaw, parking and other violations. And in the street, feeling that police were just completely disinterested in intervening to respond to any of the more problematic. And totally agree with you that not everything was problematic around the conduct of the convoy participants, but no police response to any of the problematic pieces. I take it from your testimony that you weren't witnessing any of that. You didn't seem to have concerns about police, but does that any way worry you or cause you concern to know that there were a number of other residents of this city who I think are describing to us that they literally felt abandoned by the police?
Well, I imagine there were parking violations. We walked because we knew there'd be a parking problem downtown. I mean, I think in a situation like that where you have tens of thousands of people, bylaws, if they're minor things like parking, there may be a few violations or whatever that aren't, apprehended or nothing is done about them. I mean, if you're police and you're told to, keep an eye on these tens of thousands of people, maybe we'll be less worried about parking. We did on a few occasions, have a few interactions with police. Mostly they kept with themselves, but sometimes we have to question or something. And one time we were chatting with this young police officer, and he said he just keeps telling himself it's Canada Day, because there were just throngs of people and stuff like that. I mean, it was a very unusual thing to have in January and February, but my impression of the police is they were there, they were observant, they basically they left you alone, and if you weren't doing anything, and I didn't see anybody doing anything bad. So I mean, I've heard, the streets were very, very clean when I was there, and I heard about the complaints about people urinating and defecating. I didn't see any of that. I did notice that the truckers put up a bunch of porta potties, and I did notice that the streets looked very clean and the garbage was tidied up. And I read an article that said each street had one trucker who was in charge of keeping it clean. I noticed a lot of garbage bags that were sort of pinned to various places so people could put garbage into it. And so I did not see in the downtown area a lot of garbage. That wasn't where it was supposed to be.
All right, Debbie or Monia, did you have any last question for Madeleine?
One question. Madeleine, did you try to contact your city officials like councillor or your MP or MPP about the mandate, about how you felt like, you know, like you not listened to, or did you?
Well, no, I did not. You know, I know that my prime minister thought I had unacceptable views, so I didn't really think I'd get very far. You know, maybe I should have written them all written a letter to my member of parliament. But I did not contact any politicians.
And basically, if you had something like a recommendation or a message to the politician, what would have that been? Either to the city of Ottawa or to the prime minister or to any of the MPs, what would have that been?
I would tell them that citizens you disagree with, you still represent those people. You still have a responsibility to listen to their views, and you should meet with them. I think, as previous speakers today have said, both of them, if the politicians had met with the truckers or with the convoy organizers, the things might have ended a lot sooner.
Did you see did you see some of the MPs when you went to downtown? Because some of them were talking to the convoy and to the trucks, and they came there to support them. Did you see them?
I did not see politicians, I don't think. I think the politicians who talked to the truckers were not of the governing party. I mean, I think Maxime Bernier, who's, I know he's not a representative right now, but
did you see him? Did you see him?
No, I did not see him at the protests. I saw him when James Topp came to town, but not at the truckers' protest. And I think maybe Pierre Poilievre also talked to them, but I don't know if any Liberal, did any leading Liberal, did anyone from cabinet speak to the truckers? I don't think anyone from the governing party talked to the truckers.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Debbie, did you have any final question?
No, no final questions for me.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us this evening, Madeleine, and sharing your experience and your views of the convoy.
Thank you for allowing me to speak.
All right, thank you. Well, that brings us to the end of our three witnesses, and I'm therefore going to turn things over to Debbie to wrap up this evening.
Excellent. I want to just thank everyone for attending today, including our three participants who were sharing their testimonies. We thank you so much for taking the time to join us virtually and to be here with us to also hear our questions and to kind of unpack a little bit more about your perspectives on the impact of the trucker convoy. There will be further opportunities for public hearings, both in person and online, to share stories and offer views. So if you are someone who's attending just to witness this, but you feel compelled to share your story, we highly encourage you to check out the website for the Ottawa People's Commission at opc-cpo.ca and register to speak. Or you can also submit your comments via writing. We also want to thank our interpreters for their assistance today, as well as the staff and the volunteers who helped us organize this event. Again, highly encourage you all to check the website. We are also on social media. You can find us on Twitter and on Instagram, and I believe on Facebook, but I'll clarify. Thank you so much. Have a good night, and please be safe.